Hi, everyone, and welcome to English 10 Minutes. Do you believe a whole story can be told without a single word spoken? That love can grow in the silence, in the spaces between pages? Today's story is about that kind of magic. Let's get lost in a world of old books, secret notes, and a love waiting to be discovered. My world was made of paper and ink. It lived in the quiet aisles of Powell's Corner, the old used bookstore where I worked 3 days a week after school. The store smelled like history, a sweet, dusty perfume of aging paper, worn leather, and forgotten stories. I loved it. It was a place where you could be lonely without feeling alone. My job was simple: sort the new arrivals, manage the cash register, and drink too much cheap coffee. It was a predictable, comfortable rhythm. Until her. I didn't know her name. To me, she was just the girl with the yellow coat. She came in every Tuesday, around 4 o'clock. She never bought anything. Instead, she would wander the aisles, her fingers dancing over the spines of books like she was reading their titles with her skin. She had dark, wavy hair that she always tucked behind one ear, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, seemed to be searching for something more than just a good story. The first time I found a note, I thought it was an accident. It was tucked inside a worn copy of The Great Gatsby. On a small, torn piece of notebook paper, written in neat, elegant handwriting, was a single sentence: "I wonder if Gatsby ever got tired of watching the green light." That was it. No name, no explanation. Just a thought, left behind like a ghost. I smiled, put the note in my pocket, and didn't think much of it. But the next week, it happened again. This time, inside a poetry book by Mary Oliver. The note said, "She makes the world feel like a secret I'm allowed to know." I found myself looking for the girl in the yellow coat. She was in the history section, her head tilted as she read a title. A strange feeling, warm and bright, bloomed in my chest. I started to think these notes weren't accidents. I started to hope they were for someone. Maybe, just maybe, that someone was me. The quiet bookstore didn't feel so lonely anymore. It felt like it was holding a secret, a conversation that had just begun. The notes became the highlight of my week. Finding them was a treasure hunt. I would look for the books she had touched, the ones left slightly out of place. Her notes were always simple, but deep. In a copy of Fahrenheit 451, she wrote, "It's scary when a world without books feels more real than it should." In a travel guide to Italy, she left a simple, hopeful question. Someday, I learned about her through these fragments. She was thoughtful. She felt things deeply. She saw the world in shades of poetry and wonder. I started to feel like I knew her, even though we had never spoken a word. My image of her, the girl with the yellow coat, was slowly being replaced by a more complex person, someone I desperately wanted to talk to. So, I started to answer. Not with notes. I was too shy for that. My replies were silent. After she left her "someday" note in the Italy guide, I spent an hour searching the store for a book of Italian photographs and left it on the same shelf. The next week, it was gone. When she left a note in a book about astronomy saying, "We're all just stardust," I found an old copy of Carl Sagan's Cosmos and placed it at the front of the aisle. It became our silent conversation, our love between the lines. I would see her come in, and my heart would beat a little faster. She would find my book, and sometimes I would see a small, private smile touch her lips. It was a fragile, beautiful thing we were building. It existed only in the quiet corners of the bookstore, in the space between the words she wrote and the books I chose. I treasured it, but a part of me knew it couldn't last. A conversation made of paper and ink can't go on forever. Sooner or later, someone has to be brave enough to speak out loud, and I was terrified I wasn't that person. The fear started as a small knot in my stomach and grew with every passing week. What were we doing? Was this just a game to her? For me, it was becoming everything. My daydreams were filled with conversations we might have, the sound of her laugh, the real-life version of the person I had created from her notes. The gap between my imagination and reality felt like a giant canyon. One Tuesday, I decided it was the day. I would say something, anything. "Hi" would be a good start. I practiced it in my head a dozen times. "Hi, my name is Leo. I work here. I think I've been finding your notes." It sounded stupid every time. She came in, but the yellow coat was gone. She wore a simple gray sweater, and she looked sad. The usual light in her eyes was missing. She didn't wander the aisles. She walked directly to the poetry section, pulled out a book, and sat in the old armchair in the corner. From behind the counter, I watched her. She wasn't reading, just holding the book in her lap. My carefully rehearsed "hi" died on my lips. How could I interrupt that private moment of sadness? It felt wrong. She left after only 10 minutes. The bell above the door chimed softly, announcing her departure. The silence she left behind felt heavier than usual. I waited a few minutes, my heart pounding, then walked to the armchair. The book was still there. It was Selected Poems by Robert Frost. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The note was there, but it was different. It wasn't a question or an observation. It was just one word, written in her beautiful script, looking like it was bleeding into the page. "Goodbye." The single word hit me harder than a whole novel. Goodbye? What did it mean? Was she saying goodbye to the notes? To our game? Or was it something more? The knot of fear in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. My mind raced. Goodbye. It was so final. It echoed in the silent bookstore, a definitive, heartbreaking end to our silent conversation. I looked at the word on the small piece of paper. The ink was slightly smudged, as if a single tear had fallen on it. My fantasy, the beautiful, fragile world I had built with her, was collapsing. For a moment, I felt paralyzed. I could just accept it. I could let her walk away, and our story would become another forgotten tale on a dusty shelf. I could go back to my predictable life, where the only adventures were the ones I read about. But then I thought of her sad eyes, the missing yellow coat, the finality of that word. The stories in these books were about heroes who took risks, who fought for what they wanted, who weren't afraid to cross the empty spaces. I looked around the store, at the thousands of stories waiting to be read, and I realized I didn't want to just read them anymore. I wanted to live one. My story. Our story. A new feeling pushed through the fear. Urgency. I didn't know where she lived or even her last name. But I remembered a note she had left weeks ago in a book about local birds. It said, "I love watching the sparrows at the daily grind. They're so noisy and alive." The Daily Grind was a coffee shop just 3 blocks away. It was a small chance, a crazy chance, but it was the only one I had. I took off my work apron, leaving it on the counter. I grabbed the Robert Frost book with her last note inside. I didn't even lock the door. For the first time, I ran out of the bookstore. The real world felt loud and chaotic after the quiet of my paper sanctuary. The air was cold on my face. My heart wasn't pounding with fear anymore. It was pounding with hope. I was no longer a boy hiding behind the lines. I was running to write my own. The bell on the coffee shop door jingled loudly as I pushed it open, completely out of breath. The warm smell of coffee and pastries filled the air. I scanned the room, my eyes jumping from table to table. And then I saw her. She was sitting by the window, alone, stirring a cup of tea. No yellow coat, no gray sweater. She was wearing a simple blue dress. She looked up as the bell jingled, and her eyes met mine. For a second, we just stared at each other. There was no counter between us, no shelves of books to hide behind. It was just us. I saw surprise in her eyes, then confusion, and then something else. Recognition. I walked slowly to her table, clutching the book of poems like a shield. "Hi," I managed to say. My voice was shaky. A small smile appeared on her face. It was real and even more beautiful than I had imagined. "Hi," she said softly. Her voice was exactly as I thought it would be, quiet and melodic. I held out the book. You left this?" It was a silly thing to say. She looked at the book, then back at me. "My dad loves Robert Frost," she said, her voice a little thick with emotion. "We're moving. To Oregon. My dad got a new job. We leave on Saturday." And just like that, everything made sense. The sadness, the final note. "Goodbye." "Oh," I said. It was all I could manage. My grand, heroic moment felt small and pointless now. I was too late. "I'm Alara," she said, breaking the silence. "I'm Leo," I replied. We were finally Leo and Alara. Not the boy from the bookstore and the girl with the yellow coat. Just two people, with names and futures that were about to go in very different directions. I sat down and we talked. We talked about books and coffee shops, about moving and saying goodbye, about how strange and wonderful it was to know someone through the thoughts they leave behind. The conversation was easy, natural. It was better than anything I had imagined. We didn't promise to write. We didn't make plans we knew we couldn't keep. We just shared that 1 hour, a real-life chapter in our story that had, until now, only been written on scraps of paper. When we said goodbye for the second time that day, it wasn't a sad word written in a book. It was real, spoken, and filled with the quiet understanding of a story that was brief, but beautiful and complete. I learned that some stories don't need a happy ending to be worth telling. Sometimes, the most beautiful love stories aren't found in the grand declarations, but in the quiet spaces between the lines. Thank you for listening. I hope this story reminded you that communication is about more than just words. It's about listening, noticing, and being brave enough to connect. Keep practicing your English, keep reading, and maybe you'll find your own story hidden where you least expect it. Until next time.